Good evening and welcome to another episode of Seriously Mental with Chris Shaw. Tonight's guest, Jane Barrash, Executive Director of the Continuum Center. Now please welcome, from the Heart and Mind Connection, your host, comedian, and certified peer support specialist, Chris Shaw. Thank you. Good evening. Hey, thank you for coming out tonight to say hello to our studio audience member. Thank you. And if you're watching at home, we really appreciate it. And we're sorry, it probably means your regular cable is out or your Netflix subscription ran out. So I'm so glad to have you here today, though. Here we are in the new normal, I guess is what we're calling this whole time during the coronavirus pandemic. We've gone to a pandemic, and I tell you what, I'm trying to be very mindful of the shelter in place, or as our governor calls it, the stay-at-home Minnesota, which is pretty direct for a governor who's pretty mellow there. Stay at home, Minnesota, please. And people are doing it. Some people are staying at home. Some people are having a harder time than others. I've seen people on the streets, and the problem I have is we talk about social distancing. Hey, mind your 6 feet. Unfortunately, I just happen to be 6 feet tall, and oftentimes I'll be out at Walmart or Target or the grocery store, and people will ask me to lie down so they can understand just how far apart they're supposed to be, and it makes shopping very tedious for me. So I'm so glad that you can be here today. We've got a great show. We've got Jane Barrash from the Continuum going to be with us talking about a new shift in mental health and wellness and self-care. I think it's going to be really interesting. So stick around. We'll be right back after this short commercial break. Thank you.
Raindrops are falling on my head, and just like the guy whose feet are too big for his bed, nothing seems to fit. Those raindrops are falling on my head, they keep falling. So I just did me some talking to the sun, and I said I didn't like the way he got things done, sleeping on the job. Those raindrops are falling on my head, they keep falling. But there's one thing I know, the blues they send to meet me won't defeat me. It won't be long till happiness steps up to greet me. Raindrops keep falling on my head, but that doesn't mean my eyes will soon be turning red. Crying's not for me, 'cause I'm never gonna stop the rain by complaining, because I'm free.
Hi, welcome back to Seriously Mental. I'm Chris Shaw, your host and the Executive Director of the Heart and Mind Connection, which is a Minnesota nonprofit organization that specializes in mental health and substance use recovery, advocacy, and education. More about that later. I'm really excited for our guest today, Jane Barrash, who's bringing to us thoughts about a new way to look at how we deal with mental health and self-care. Please welcome Jane Barrash.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Hi, Jane. Nice to finally meet you. We've had some discussions, and it's just nice to be able to finally sit down and talk a little bit more in person about what you've done. I've read a little bit of some of the information that you've brought on, and it has made me really think in different ways about how I've gone over the last many years looking at my mental illness and what I do about wellness, and how that falls really into kind of this structured way of that we do things. You're here to tell us a little bit about some new thoughts on this.
Actually, the thoughts aren't new, but what's new is they've gained a lot of momentum, and they've been tested and applied more and more widely supported from more sources of scientific evidence. So my work with Continuum Center, and Continuum Center's been around for 40 years, and our mission is to explore the nature of consciousness, human capacity, and the continuity and interconnectedness of life. And it's an interdisciplinary and multicultural exploration. So our work has involved, internationally known physicists, brain scientists, physicians, mathematicians, biologists, biochemists, immunologists, virologists, astrophysicists, and Native American, West African, East Indian, Asian, Tibetan, Mayan, and Egyptian cultural leaders. So part of our work is bringing in these figures in public forum and then developing applications of the research for business, medicine, education, corrections, community development, and personal development. And I've been with Continuum for 35 years and have personally benefited from a lot of information. So the new model or the new approach is to say that, well, let me back up for a minute and say that the standard approach, the conventional model, says that consciousness is what the brain does. That consciousness is something reducible to the physical material components, because that's the materialist model. And you can call it the materialist paradigm, you can call it Newtonian, Cartesian, reductionist, because it reduces everything to the smallest pieces and particles, because the assumption is that the universe is fundamentally matter. So if you want to understand about the universe, you've got to study the material parts and pieces.
Things you can see.
Things you can see, well, René Descartes, a French philosopher, actually, in the late 1600s, came up with the scientific method, which says if you want to learn anything important about the universe and anything in it, you've got to publicly observe, physically measure, and repeatedly test. And if you can't do those things, don't waste your time. It's not going to be real, it's not going to be valid information to help you understand how things or people work. So what's interesting is René Descartes got his idea for the scientific method from 3 dreams. And then turns around and says, oh, dreams have nothing to do with reality. Dreams can't help you understand how the world works because you can't measure a dream, you can't publicly observe a dream, you can't repeatedly test a dream, so discard it. And when I teach a class, and it can be corporate executives, it can be the most seriously emotionally and behaviorally disordered kids. I've worked with maximum security inmates, I've worked with addicts, I've worked with medical professionals, I've worked in the slums of Rio, I've worked on Indian reservations. Doesn't matter, any group, I'll first ask who knows the difference between a brain and a mind, because we think they're the same.
Right.
And I think this misconception has caused a lot of problems. I think this materialist model has caused a lot of problems. But anyway, I'll ask, who's ever had a dream that happened later? You wouldn't believe.
Sure.
You wouldn't believe the stories I've heard. One story from a 3M executive was that he loves to hunt, and this is a real. I mean, I was working with the national directors of the traffic control maintenance division. So they're all engineers, and they're, and I'm there, and they're like, yeah, what is this going to be about? So I asked that, and all of a sudden, people sit up straight. And at the first break, because he didn't want to say it in, front of everybody, but he comes over and he's like, I love to hunt, and I'll go with a friend or, buddy. We'll go to a part of the state we've never been before. And he said, I had a dream that I was driving with a friend down a long, winding road, and we came across a gas station at the end of it with crooked sign and paint peeling, and went inside, and there were just a few aluminum shelves with toothpaste, Band-Aids, and aspirin. And he said, the next summer, I was driving with my buddy, and we're going in a part we'd never been before, and we're going down this winding road that looked familiar to me. And all of a sudden, we come up the very gas station that I saw in my dream, with the crooked sign, the paint peeling, and the shelves with da-da-da-da-da. I've heard so many stories, and these are not vague similarities. I mean, and they've been life and death. I've heard from little kids to adults. So we start talking about how, we've got the model that we have from the materialist, Newtonian, Cartesian, reductionist, mechanistic model of the universe and the mind, is that only what's physical, measurable, and publicly observable is real. That's the objective world. Your subjective world, oh, you got a dream, you got your imagination, who cares? It's not real. We focus on the
Sure,
material, measurable things.
quantifiable, but if this is happening on a regular basis and you're doing case studies where it's not just a random event where people are telling you these things happen on a regular basis, where do you explain to people then what that
So this is where I get to. So we've been conditioned to believe that only what is out there, measurable, physical, material is real, the objective world. And we talk about this program, Discovery of Self. It's one of the programs of Continuum Center. It's about how to access the proverbial other 95% of brain-mind capacity.
Okay.
And I will say, one reason we're only using 5 or 10%, proverbially, metaphorically, whatever, is because we're focused on the objective world as reality, and we pay no real attention to the subjective domain.
Okay.
And we're focused on the out there, trying to get more of this or less of that and control this, because that's how we're safe. Is making people crazy, and they have no idea what's going on inside, let alone how to manage it or optimize it. And we've been conditioned that in these two realms, objective and subjective, only the objective is real. Other cultures that don't buy into the modern Western scientific model, which isn't so modern, it's over 350 years old. How many things do you own?
And
How many things do you go by?
Practice in other societies.
Many other dimensions of reality are incorporated into the practices of other societies.
And you spoke
We're
about,
stuck.
you spoke about Native Americans and how that part of, call it spirituality, but this belief beyond the...
They believe that consciousness is in all of life. And again, our work is an exploration of consciousness. So, we oh, that's dead, that's nothing. What if consciousness is in everything? And it changes your view. But we're stuck in this little box of objective reality and a sense that the out there is out there and needs to be managed and controlled. And we're all about believing that only when you can control and predict are you safe. And we're all into control and prediction, and that's not helping people. Mm-hmm. Because, so once they start to understand, so these other cultures believe that the subjective and the objective are like this, and that in fact the subjective world has more power. And when you start to focus on what's going on in here, and you realize from the research from quantum physics and brain science, actually the left brain, right brain research, that was Roger Sperry, the Nobel scientist, he went on to say that consciousness, what's that?
He owes me $5, Roger.
Good luck, he's dead. But anyway, so he went on to say that contrary to the conventional thinking, the materialist model, that believes that consciousness is a byproduct of the brain, he's saying consciousness is primary and a causal reality. Your internal states, and when we do the objective and subjective, it's easy to list the objective. It's furniture, it's cars, it's money, it's people, it's jobs, it's, houses, it's blah, blah, blah. What about the subjective domain? Dreams. Okay, dreams. Well, what else is it? People have a hard time. It's imagination, it's beliefs, it's expectations, it's goals, it's memories, it's intuition, it's opinions, it's perspectives. You've got a very rich subjective domain, and what consciousness is, all of that, and it's causal. People are creating things, are causing things from their internal states, from attitudes, from memories. They're making things happen. And they're like, oh, I don't have that kind of power. It just happened to me. So we've got this whole victim thing because we believe the out there is out there and doing things to us. And what happens, and we also believe reality is out there in the objective domain. Quantum physics says there's no reality out there separate from you. Everybody has their own. And when people realize you've got to take responsibility for your reality, and there are things you can do working on the inside to shift, that then is going to change who shows up, what shows up, and how things turn out. I just finished 4 years intensively at North High in North Minneapolis, the highest crime, violence, poverty rate neighborhood. And I started working with the basketball team. I was invited in by the coach. When they were in last place, the school had been the city tried to shut down the school because of low GPAs and grad rates, and the team in an all-black school was in last place in the city. I started working in 2013-14 basketball season, and these kids started learning a lot of these concepts. So you need a conceptual framework. The internal resource development strategies are powerful, but if you don't have a different conceptual framework for how the universe works and your place in it, you're going to feel good, and then you're going to go out in this world where you feel like it's a jungle and it's a rat race and it's a grind and they did this and they did that, and you're going to keep attracting a lot of the same things you have. So these kids started learning, wait a minute, regardless of what's going on there, can choose what my reality is. And we, in the brain, there's the neocortex, there's the reptilian, the mammalian, neocortex, left and right hemisphere, frontal lobe. All we do in education is develop the left hemisphere. We do nothing for the nervous system. We do nothing for the emotional animal brain. We do nothing for the right brain. We have a whole hemisphere of the brain that's for transcendent thinking, for introspection, for seeing connections, for all the things that math, science, and verbal skills don't do a thing for. So, why would we have a whole half of the brain for transcending the three dimensions if there's no reason to?
Okay, this sounds like a movie plot almost. And so you talked a minute ago about those things when you ask somebody, what are those other things? So besides dreams, imagination, creativity, things like that, that somebody couldn't draw a picture of what that looks like. They might be able to draw a brain, but they couldn't draw a mind. Tell me two things. With the work that you do at the Continuum Center, what have you come up with, especially in regards to mental illness and mental health, that is this change that you're looking at?
Okay, so part of, I think, the problem with the current model is that a lot of people, we don't really understand the power of the emotional brain. A lot of people think, it's just your thoughts. No. So the first was the reptilian brain. Millions of years later, the emotional animal brain, and then the neocortex. The emotional brain is foundational for our thinking. And if you don't have that right, it's going to affect your perception. It's going to affect your reactions. And so when people realize that, they got to go in and kind of take a look at the emotional terrain and see how to, move with that. And that if you have, again, if consciousness is a causal reality and you have unresolved emotions, your unresolved emotions are like a button. And if you have a button in this interactive universe, the universe can't help but send you somebody or something to push it. And we don't see the connections. Our eyes see a little bit of the light spectrum. We call that reality. There's so much more. We don't see all the connections between each of us and between all of life. And I've had fifth graders. They had, I have a workbook that goes to corporate executives, goes down to fifth grade. Then we do another model for younger kids. But we get to the point where they have to, for homework, do you have a recurring theme in your life? Like, I work so hard and don't get credit. Or I'm great for everybody, nobody's ever there for me. Or people promise things and they never deliver. Or I get in trouble for things I never did. People have these recurring themes. Well, try to identify what theme you might have, negative, whatever in your life. So I'm just going to focus on fifth and sixth graders. They come back and they talk, two kids. One, I have a button that I don't matter. Another little girl, I have a button that I'm invisible. And these kids were already experiencing, difficulties.
Sure.
Then homework for next week. When's the first time you remember feeling that you don't matter or that you're invisible? They come back the next week. So this one kid, Sam, he's like, well, when I was 4, my mother, she had some problems. And she had to go away and I had to live with my uncle. I thought it was going to be for a couple of days, but it was for 2 years. And he had a 16, a 14, a 12-year-old, and I was 4. And he goes, at night you'd have dinner, and if you didn't finish all your food, you couldn't get dessert. And he said, in 2 years, I only had dessert 3 times, and one was opposite day, where you get dessert first. Boom, I don't matter. It's like, excuse me, I don't have my mother, I'm a 4-year-old, and I can't even have dessert. And by the way, who put all that food on your plate? Then you go to Mimi, and she's like, well, when I started first grade, I went to a school where they'd been together since kindergarten. On the first day of school, I I went out on the playground, I went up to a couple girls and I said, can I play with you? And they said no. They ordered me to another side of the playground where I was all by myself, invisible. Boom. So first of all, to me, mental health is emotional issues, and there's so much research that your emotions affect your brain chemistry and your brain wiring. So you got emotional problems as a kid, it's gonna present as problems in the brain, but if you just look at it as brain chemicals and neurons and you're not looking at what those underlying emotional issues are and how to deal with those, then it's like, well, in the materialist model, if it's a physical chemical thing, let's give you chemicals. But that's not addressing the underlying thing. So part of it is to kind of look at this bigger framework, first of all, to understand why certain things show up, what your baseline is for issues and where they may have started, and then to understand, I've worked in a homeless shelter with men who'd had every kind of issue. Obviously, they're homeless. So St. Stephen's, I was there for a year, I had a men's group. And another story of a guy, Michael, who didn't want to talk much, smart guy, but would lose jobs because of drinking and other problems. And what we got into finally was a small group. I'm a focus on Michael. And he had a thing of whatever was triggering his anger, I can't remember. Well, it turns out that when he was a kid, so when we try to get to the emotional underpinnings, and he said he's gone through treatment a million times, never had to say anything real. He knew what to say to get them. A lot of people do that. Nobody wants to talk about those things. But he now had a different framework and an understanding. And he goes, when I was 6, this is something he never talked about. An uncle came over to the house and wanted to take me to the mall. We never went to the mall. He pulled off the road in Florida, took off all my clothes, tried to rape me. I ran down the highway naked, was picked up by the police. They take me home. My parents never said a thing to this guy. And then my mother got committed for some reason. My dad married the stepwoman who beat me every day with an electrical cord. So his process of working with these things, just a new model, and then there are internal resources, not just, so we work also with diaphragmatic breathing, but he ended up, and this happens a lot, people will then drop out of the group. He came back months later, and because of what he'd learned, he started doing things differently. And he went to see his father he'd had no connection with for 15 years. But we talk about, from physics, the quantum leap. You're in a rut. You can't predict when an electron's going to jump to another level. The universe is unpredictable. And we call it taking the quantum leap on an emotional, personal level. When you're willing to get out of your comfort zone and take an emotional risk, you can jump to a whole nother unpredictable level. So people don't want to take emotional risks. They want to play everything safe.
Okay,
he ended up going to see his father. His father ended up, he ended up getting a house. His father moved in with him, and he said it was the first happy Christmas I've ever had in my life, because he was willing to anyway.
In that story, you said a key phrase that hit me, and it was he started doing things differently. So he understands the initial trauma that has been carrying in his life forward. With the work that you do and the trainings that you do, for both a situation like his and this 5-year-old who now has an understanding where that button came from, what things differently do they have to do to move forward and out of that, utilizing this new realm?
So the inner resources we deal with are focusing, imagery, and diaphragmatic breathing, which Anna, an earlier guest of yours, talked about. And I'll say, if you watch a baby or an animal, they breathe in their belly. It's how we're designed to breathe. It changes your brain chemistry, it changes everything. And then we add focusing. You got to learn to keep your attention, because your attention, everybody, it's all over. When they have to practice keeping their attention on their breathing for longer and longer periods. And then when you can keep your mind where you want it, it's not getting pulled over here, and you're not at the mercy of circumstances. So they learn the breathing, they learn the focusing, and then imagery. We're born with an imagination. And then once you learn to read and write, it's kid stuff. It's so powerful. And your body doesn't know the difference between a vivid imagery and an actual event. People's memories are wrong anyway. So I've worked with a lot of people, and it's like you identify the time and place and situation when a button was popped, when somebody did or said something to you. And you can go back and through imagery, when you're breathing, because if you're not breathing, nothing gets in your body. It stays stuck up here. But when you're breathing and you do the imagery, you start to change all kinds of things, but your body starts to remember a new past. So you change the ending, you change what happened, you change the feeling of it. And imagery isn't just thinking about something, it's actually experiencing it in detail. So you have to go through the motions. So people have changed an event from the past in their body and in their memories. So that's another thing they do. They do the imagery, they do the breathing, and then they have to take some emotional risks.
Okay.
So those are some examples of what they can do.
I like that framework, and it sounds like something that you would have to work with somebody kind of on an ongoing basis to help them kind of develop that skill, because it doesn't sound innate based on the other models we already have. Before we go here, we've got a time where people are stressed because the uncertainty of what's going on. What are one or two things that people could keep in mind and practice on a daily basis that might help relieve some of this anxiousness or
Okay, so certainly, when you breathe in, your belly expands. Most people go, when they breathe in, it's up here. So it's like, take a deep breath. Tell them where. When you take a deep breath, your belly should go out. So, and then, the thing is, where it's the news or it's every bad thing that might happen, and learn to train your attention. And then fill your mind, do your imagery on when this is all over. What's it like to be laughing with friends? To be, taking a walk in your favorite store that you couldn't be in before, or memories of great times. So you take control over where your attention is, and you put it on those things that fill you with optimism. There's so much research on optimism. There's so much research on, compassion. Do the things where you're, going to be helping someone else. So you do your breathing, you do your focusing, and start to train your mind to go to what's positive, what felt good, what will feel good, and don't allow your mind to be pulled. And most people are just in a reaction mode. They just react to everything out there, and they are not kind of using their internal state to their greatest advantage.
Sure. Before we go, one more question. A lot of people are talking about that this time where we are kind of isolated in a lot of situations, and that causing this this fear of the unknown. I also see this as, when we come out of this, that there is an opportunity to really utilize that change back into this new normal, or whatever people call it, to a possibility of having that change. Do you see that this could be an opportunity for everybody to kind of think differently?
In this model of interconnectedness and consciousness in all of life, I believe, yes, that part of the whole purpose is, the earth is alive, it's intelligent, there's intelligence, and it's probably saying, you know what, you people are all pretty screwed up, and you need a reset. You need a big reset, and use the time wisely. Don't go back into the same kind of mindless, whatever you've been. So if you got to be in, be in.
Nice.
Learn focusing. Take care of some business you've been avoiding and been overwhelmed by in the back of your mind. And when you go back out, do it more mindfully. Be more focused. Be more grounded. Be more optimistic. Be more compassionate.
I love that. I love that. And hopefully at some point we'll be able to get a little closer from 6 feet and start to feel that interconnectedness more. Jane Barrash, where can people find out more about the work that you do?
ContinuumCenter.net. Continuum Center.net.
I'll have that listed somewhere
Thank
in
you.
this area. Jane, I want to thank you so much for being here. Really interesting discussion. I'd like to learn more about what's going on. Maybe we could have you back at some point.
I'd love
on
it.
another topic. Thank you so much for joining us today for another episode of Seriously Mental. I'm Chris Shaw. Please take care of yourselves. Be well. For more information on resources around mental health and wellness, please check out our website, www.theheartandmindconnection.org. Thank you.